Meet The Lot, native token of Lukki Exchange and the most potential tool for investing this year. Trade now on P2B, B2B and Lukki.io.
What would I like to have written on my tombstone? I don't really think about that much. I'm not sure. I would not want it to say Bitcoin guy. I hope that I'm known more for like being a good person rather than being a just the guy who did a lot of stuff for Bitcoin. So maybe like all around good guy is what I'd want written on my tombstone. I think the big challenges now are figuring out kind of which market niches are going to take off first. So is it going to be international remittances? Is it going to be, I don't know, tourists traveling? Is it going to be something else that we don't see that's really going to kind of make Bitcoin mainstream? Maybe it'll be some particular part of the world where they haven't enjoyed a stable currency. Maybe Bitcoin will really start to become mainstream there. But I think the next challenge for Bitcoin really is to go from this kind of really niche early adopter thing to you're finding some part in the world of money where Bitcoin really makes a huge amount of sense. My attitude is to let lots of experiments happen, and that is happening. So I have no idea how Bitcoin will succeed. I'm reasonably successful that it will succeed. And my job as kind of working on the core pieces of Bitcoin is to make sure that those core pieces remain reliable. And so I really do think that it's like the early days of the internet, where I don't think anybody would have predicted Facebook and Twitter as being huge uses of the internet, or streaming movies, or I should go back. People probably did predict that, but people predicted all sorts of other things for the internet too. So I think you just have to try lots of things. Lots of things will fail, but there will be a few things that will succeed. I think they're right to be skeptical. I think maybe if they start to understand it, maybe they'll start to become less skeptical. Maybe they won't. Maybe they will still believe that Bitcoin can't possibly take their business for reasons X, Y, and Z. I'm not a banker, and I'm always very careful not to assume that I know more about somebody's business than somebody who's in that business. But if I was a banker, I would be definitely learning more about Bitcoin and thinking about how either Bitcoin or some other technology enabled by the internet might disrupt what they're doing. And if they're not thinking about that, I think they will be out of business in 10 or 15 years, because I think the world of money really hasn't embraced the internet yet. And I think, as you say, any business that hasn't embraced the internet is going to have trouble. I mean, the world of money is such a large place that I think there is room for more than one. I mean, the network effects for Bitcoin are huge, in that if you're thinking about accepting some virtual currency or using some payment system, you naturally kind of want to use the one that's the biggest, because it will let you reach the most customers, or let you, exchange value with the most number of other people in the world. And so there's naturally kind of everybody wants to join the most popular system, and Bitcoin has a huge head start. So I think any system that wants to exceed Bitcoin will have to be a whole lot better in some way to compete. Just being a little bit better in a couple different ways, you just won't be able to compete. But that said, I think there might be systems that are used for particular niches where they really are a whole lot better. Bitcoin is the first successful electronic cash system, and so you really I think of it as electronic cash. So it's cash in that if I pay somebody, it's like paying somebody with cash. There's a one-to-one, with no other party involved in the transaction. So it's not like credit cards or any other form of internet payment that we've seen. It really is a, I pay you, and it's just like we were, in person exchanging, euro coins. It's at a high conceptual level, we're just doing that electronically. And so that's really the huge advantage. That's a huge breakthrough, and that's why people are really excited, because cash has its uses. Credit cards and banks are useful, but you don't always use them. There may be reasons of privacy, there may be reasons of convenience, certainly reasons of cost, where cash is better. And so bringing the idea of cash to the internet, I think, is really incredibly exciting and powerful. The technical advantages, Bitcoin's designed for the internet. So if you look at the payment systems that we're running now on the internet, most of them were designed maybe back in the day of paper check. Some of them designed even before that. And so the processes are inefficient, the costs are high. Bitcoin really is designed for the internet. It's designed with the latest stable technology. And so it will just be more efficient, faster, more convenient, and global. Treat Bitcoin as a very high-risk investment. So don't invest your life savings in it. Don't if you want to buy some Bitcoins, don't mortgage your house to buy Bitcoins. Treat it as a high-risk investment and make sure your investments are diversified, because it is brand new technology that does have bugs. We're getting better and better at making the core system has been actually incredibly reliable. The systems built on top have been a lot less reliable. So we've seen a lot of failures of Bitcoin businesses. We've seen a lot of failures of just security on people's computers. I'm sure we'll see failures of security on people's mobile phones if they're using their mobile phones to store their Bitcoins. So in the same way that you wouldn't walk around Amsterdam with $100,000 in cash in your pocket because you might get robbed, I think you should treat Bitcoin the same way. As cash that you have, you shouldn't have more than you're willing to lose. Well, there are technical questions that I would love to chat with him about, just kind of design questions about how Bitcoin was designed and some of the decisions he made that he just never answered, like definitively, I meant it to be this way versus I had to pick a number and so this is the number I picked. So I think those are the kind of questions that I would be most interested in asking him, which may sound funny to somebody who's not a programmer. But for programmers, it really is about the technology. It's not about the personality. So I guess once I got those technical questions out of the way, I might ask him what his background is and what he did before Bitcoin, and kind of where did he go to school. Those kinds of things would also be interesting to know, but less interesting than some of the technical questions that make me scratch my head and wonder, did he choose 10 minutes based on some simulation, or was it just it felt like about the right amount of time for a new Bitcoin block to come out? I think it's very different if you can read the code and understand it. Then you don't have to trust Satoshi. It doesn't matter who wrote the code. It's the code. The computers execute the code in the way that you tell them to execute the code. So you can be sure that the system is as described, and trust that that's true, because you can verify it. So I understand though people who don't know how to code, who can't read C++, looking at kind of where has Bitcoin come from and kind of looking at it with, should I trust it? And really, I think the only way for Bitcoin to gain that trust is for time to pass, and for Bitcoin to continue working, and for people to hear about it 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 times over 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 years, and realize that it's not scary, to know people who are using it and are happy with it. So I think trust will just take time, and then Satoshi becomes a creation myth, right? We love creation myths, and I think they're often scary and mysterious, and I don't know, it'll be interesting to see in 10 years does the fact that Bitcoin has this mysterious anonymous creator help it or hurt it? I don't know. I think it might actually help it. Just kind of, it's certainly, people are certainly interested in that part of the story, and I think that actually helps. Some regulators want to know. Some regulators are very concerned about consumer privacy and would rather nobody knew. I guess, ideally the government wants to strike that balance between consumer privacy and the ability for law enforcement to find bad people doing bad things. And I think that balance can be struck, and privacy and anonymity in Bitcoin is a very complicated thing. I mean, every Bitcoin transaction is public. So it's very different from like credit card transactions where the credit card company knows everything about what you're buying. And they say that they won't tell anybody, although looking at all of the security and data breaches that have happened, I think that's a big problem. I think maybe kind of the next wave of data breaches we'll see might be, people's full transaction histories getting hacked from a big database somewhere and released to the world. Government and law enforcement kind of has to flip the way they do things with Bitcoin and think of it like cash. So if you think about cash transactions, the government has no way of knowing if you and I trade a few euros. But if you try to buy a car, at least I know in the United States, if you bring a suitcase full of $100 bills to a car dealership and try to buy a car with cash, they're required to fill out a report saying, hey, this person whose government ID is here just bought a Lamborghini with cash. You might want to know about that. You might want to go ask them, where did they get that cash? I think Bitcoin would be very similar. And so, just because you're using Bitcoin, it's not going to excuse you from the rules that are already in place and that governments seem to deal pretty well with in the world of cash. Right, I grew up in Australia and the United States, which are pretty free countries. I don't know how you convince countries that have more a culture of control to allow the Bitcoin experiment to happen in their country. That's a good question for somebody who knows a lot more about kind of the cultures there. I would say to them on a very broad level that letting people experiment and innovate is the path to incredible prosperity. I think we see that over and over again. And I don't know. I don't know if that's a message that they would listen to or not. Money used to be very democratic in that, seashells or some other rare but available object was used as money. There was no barrier to anybody creating more of it, right? When gold was used as money, anybody could try to find some gold and dig it out of the ground. It's interesting because Bitcoin kind of goes back to that model of, there's no barrier there's no gatekeeper, there's no government or corporation that says, I will be the official creator of the money and keeper of the books of who owns what. It's much more distributed and much more like, kind of money when it started. And so it will be interesting to see if Bitcoin really does take off, or things like Bitcoin, we might go back to that older model of, people really being more in control of money creation, money accounting, all of that. I think that would be a good thing, actually. I love working on new things. I started my career working on 3D computer graphics when 3D computer graphics were brand new and different, and this was back in 1988, before 3D graphics chips, pretty much. And so I just enjoy working on new technology and thinking about technologies that really have a big impact. And Bitcoin caught my interest, and it's been very, very interesting.